I am a young man, in my early 20s, kind of a twinkish build. In other words, a small young dude, who is usually unnoticeable, and I don't come off threatening in the slightest. I'm also easy to intimidate, because I'm kind of short. Anyway, I grew up in the city, so I'm pretty used to having to be aware of my surroundings, and keep an ear out for any suspicious looking people, or those who scheme all day long in the city. After about 19 years in the city, I moved to the rural, suburban, foresty state of Pennsylvania. Not a lot of action out here. As in my town, most of the people are retired, or your run-of-the-mill young families. There is no city life in this town. Public transit isn't even 24 hours. Needless to say, at about 11 p.m, the streets are nearly deserted, with about a car or two driving by every 10 minutes or so. Compared to the city, this gives the town a very secluded and desolate feeling. In about 3 years of living here, I haven't really experienced much. Maybe the once in a blue moon drunkard, but even they just scurry on their way home, trying not to fall into someone's lawn. Once, I had a guy try to insist I get in his car, and he helped me to my destination, but that quickly ended as another car approached and he just gave up. But my luck had finally run up. I was instantly faced with one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life. The worst part is, living in such a slow-paced town has dulled my senses and taken away my ability to act quick, the way you'd need to in the city. On one breezy fall evening, I had decided that I wanted to go to the supermarket and blow $20 on frozen food and other snacks. It was about 3 in the morning, and since I've always been an insomniac, I figured I would stock up on snacks and just watch horror films all night. I typically made trips like that, as the supermarket was just across the street and it was 24 hours. I've never had any kind of problem before. As I mentioned, people aren't really out late in my town, and if you're wandering around after midnight, you're usually the only person walking around. This supermarket is part of a fairly big mall complex. The stores are all connected, with a pharmacy to the left of the supermarket and some clothing stores to the right. Around 3 a.m, the huge parking lot is almost completely empty. That night, as I was making my way through the parking lot, my eyes caught a red pickup truck driving up the block. I know some people feel like serial killers and kidnappers all drive cars like that, as it's easy to stash a body in the trunk. But in PA, due to farms and rougher terrain, like forests and dirt paths, almost everyone drives a truck of some sort. So it didn't strike me as any kind of red flag, and barely paid mind to it, only that at that time, there was nothing else to observe. So, I mildly watched the truck as I made my way towards the direction of the truck, if only to pass him and the streets he was on to keep going home. He drove up to the red light, and that's when I noticed the driver's weird behaviour. His windows were extremely tinted, so I don't know what was occurring in the car for sure, but by the looks of it from the outside, it looked as if he was either in a hurry, seemingly tapping the gas pedal, or drunk and falling asleep, occasionally letting go of the brake, and then waking up when feeling the car jerk forward, because for the remainder of the red light, the car kept inching forward, little by little as such. The light went green, and the truck stood there. That's when I felt uneasy. It wasn't inching, no turn signals were flickering. It was as if he parked, or was distracted by something. At this point, I'm inside the parking lot, but walking along the border of the street he was on from the inside of the lot. And that's when I think he noticed me, as I was the only moving object in the lot. He just stood there. I couldn't help but stare. It was as if the tinted windows made me feel like he couldn't see me well either. I'm not sure if I upset him in staring so blatantly as I walked, but the light went red again, and he ran it. He made a right, driving along the top border of the lot, only he didn't follow the road out, or even enter the lot through the entrance. It was as if he was angrily driving, because he made another sharp right, cut through the trees and grass borders of the lot, and as his car lumped and hopped its way into the lot, he immediately whipped the car into my direction and cut his headlights off. This made me turn around completely. I slowly walked backwards, not taking my eyes off the general direction of where he entered. There were no lights, no street lights, no parking lot lights. At 3 a.m. in Pennsylvania, it got pretty pitch black. This made me momentarily lose any common sense, and fear instantly took over. I began subconsciously going over the possibilities of such behaviour, but I couldn't logically understand what was going on. After about 30 seconds of walking backwards, I had noticed that his car menacingly gained a few dozen feet on me, driving slow enough as to not make much noise on the ground, seemingly swimming through the darkness of the atmosphere. I felt lightheaded, weak in the knees, instantly dry-mouthed and sweaty-palmed. The only reason I realized how much the car was advancing was because, by the sweet grace of God, the streetlight at the corner in the distance miraculously reflected the bright green of the silver grille of the truck. I felt so alone. Like in that moment, I had no one. I knew no one was aware of what was going on. Pennsylvania tends to be safer and more boring, so there is never anything like security watching cameras or neighborhood patrols. Even people in the homes facing the lot. It was as if for that moment, no one else existed in the area, and I was somewhere abandoned, fleeing from a psycho. I thought I was going to have a heart attack when I noticed the engine rev a little and the car slightly fly forward. That's when I somehow remember that directly to the side of me, across the street, was a hospital complex. However, the ground was lumpy and had many dips, so I knew he would have a chance of catching up to me if I just ran across. But I also knew he might fuck up his tires trying to drive fast through those dips. I sprinted across the street as his car continued to advance towards me. I scurried as fast as I could. I thought the weight of my bags would drag me to the ground as they got in the way of my legs as I tried to run for my life. I made it across and stood on top of the first dip as I instinctively turned around to see my stalker. That's when I realized that his car stood at the very edge of the parking lot, watching me. I caught my breath, and as the tears began to bulge up in my eyes, I kept walking across the tops of the dips and hills towards my building, never taking my eyes off the car. It just stood, watching me, never displaying any intent on moving or driving anywhere at all. I saw the driver watching me until I got into my building. By the time I got upstairs to my floor's lobby and looked out of the window, he was gone. Completely. I'll never know what he wanted, and that fact haunts me. The way his intimidating stalker driving ways gave off the vibe that he relished in the fact that no one was around or watching, and he could do anything he wanted. Creepy, red pickup truck driver. Let's never, ever meet again.
I was always the quiet one. I'd hawk my food, avoid participation in daily activities, and avoid my friends and family as much as I could. I'd often get teased for being such an outcast, but that never bothered me. My name is Beth, and I grew up in a small town called Miles in Montana. Life was elegant and there weren't any problems. The idealistic lifestyle, as you say. My brother's name is Alex, and when I was 7, I had another brother named Jason, who passed away because of a brain injury. The year is 2007, and my family had just left to have a little vacation near the Yellowstone River. We referred to it as the river. Not much you can do there, I thought. My biggest pet peeve was to spend time near my boring parents. I'm 19, single, and angry at the world. I was meant to go to college, yet never ended up registering. My uncle was very rich. He owned a large company and was very friendly with us. He even offered to pay for my first 2 years of college, but I declined. Anyways, my father loved fishing on the river and would always take his fishing gear with him. I wouldn't know the first thing about fishing, nor would I even care. They ended up leaving pretty late, but I knew they'd spend a couple of nights there, because they had always loved camping, and I didn't. I called my friends over, and we had ourselves a little fun. They were together. The guy's name was Noah, and his girlfriend's name was Maddie. It was about midnight, and we started talking about our town's creep. Everybody knew him, but it was almost like he never existed. Long hair, demon-like eyes, and very tall. Think about it. A man who's been accused of rape, stalking, battery, and more, but has never landed in our newspapers. He was like a ghost and a rumor, all rolled into one. We decided to get some food at a local shop and got bored really fast. While driving home, Noah brought up the cemetery that's a couple minutes away from where we initially were. I don't remember why, but we ended up going there. We parked our car on the lot, stepped foot on the dusty ground. I remember the feeling. It was cold and still. There was no wind, no trees, no crickets, no anything. We approached the graves, and Noah was walking on the tombstones. I yelled at him to get off because it was disrespectful. Smoking and laughing, we took a seat on a bench and talked about our lives. Our boring old lives. The lives that no one seemed to care for. We were all too much alike. We grew up going to the same schools, avoiding the same people, and enduring the same bullshit since day one. Our laughter was interrupted by the sound of a car engine. Not a lot of cars drive near the cemetery this late, so this struck us as odd. We spent more time near the graves, splitting up and doing whatever. I remember visiting my Jason's grave, looking down at it. I felt guilty, almost as if I was his killer. I brushed off the feeling and tears ran down my face. The silence was broken by my friends coming towards me with jokes and laughter. I wiped my tears and smiled as they continued talking about random topics. The walk back to the lot was nearly 200 meters away, so we walked. Behind us, the road, and to our left, the entrance to the yard. We could all hear it. Oh, yes. We all heard it after we quieted down. I whispered not to look back as we sped up towards our car. There was a beat-up car entering the yard without its headlights on. I remember feeling really scared, but not for my life. I assumed it was a police car that was checking up on the cemetery, so being high was a huge problem. Moments later, we were getting into the car and about to start our engine, when suddenly a man with a hoodie started banging on our windows, crying for help as the darkness swallowed him. All of our doors were unlocked, so we had to scramble to lock them. After that, we were all frozen in fear. This was clearly the man who came out of the car parked near the entrance of the yard. Maddie yelled at him to get lost with a weak voice, but the man continued crying and asking for help. To tell you the truth, I was mildly convinced he needed assistance of some sort. Perhaps he was an old beggar, lost, or some visitor that had psychological problems. But nothing in my body was going to let me open the door for him. I yelled at Noah to start the car, and just as he turned the key, the man made his face visible. There he was, the ghost as described by the townspeople. Long black hair that almost touched his waist, deep voice, dark eyes, and long nails. You could also see his cheekbones. His face went from a please help me face to a sinister smile, one that doesn't have mercy of any sort. Maddie began freaking out at this and began yelling. I swore to myself that if the engine didn't start, I would get the fuck out of the car and run home. The engine did start, and with screeching of the tires we backed out of the lot, only to have this maniac chase us. And in his hand we saw a blade. We drove towards the exit while he tatted along running his fastest. As we passed his beat-up car, we noticed two other figures sitting in the back seat of his car. We had to slow down because the road was very bumpy near the exit. As we approached his car, we noticed the two figures jumped towards us from within the car and began banging on the window. The man was yelling swear words and other fucked up shit at us, but between his noises and our engine, we heard the distinct sound of terrified children, young voices crying for help from within the car. We all heard it and none of us could deny it. We were paranoid due to the drugs and the shitty situation the universe has tossed us. I screamed to call the police, but none of us had our phones on us. If we had left the scene, the owner of the car would easily have fled the area and killed the kids. We also wouldn't do anything to him because he was armed and dangerous. I still wish I didn't have to see what happened next, but this scene will never leave my mind. Noah jumped out of the car and tried the door handle of the man's car. It budged and the tables have now turned completely. The kids backed down away from my friend, from his offer. He insists and continued to try and convince them that he's here to help them, but to no luck. This is when Maddie and I noticed a man laughing while catching his breath. He now stood a few feet away from Noah and began humming a song. What he did next made me have anxiety from then until now. He ran full speed at Noah and stabbed him in his right palm. I cried as Maddie screamed, and there was nothing any of us could have done about it. The worst part about everything was the kids. The kids just laughed and clapped while cheering as my friend fought for his life. They yelled, "Finish him! Finish him!" as the blade continued to tear through my friend's hand. And just like that, that creep got off my friend and got in his car. All I saw was Noah's palm squirting blood. His eyes were wide open, and he was barely moving. We rushed our friend to the hospital, and so began the longest year of my life. A couple of detectives were hired to solve this case, but to our worst luck, nothing ever came of it. It was now 2015. Noah and Maddie weren't together anymore, and they weren't my friends anymore. My grandmother passed away, and I had to attend the funeral. I hated it. I felt like the little boy from Omen that didn't want to go to church. I felt like if I left the car, the man would come out of nowhere and take me. Before I knew it, I was standing near her grave, paying respects. The funeral was going as planned, and then I heard a couple of teenagers in the back of the crowd. These kids weren't being as respectful as they should have. I made my way towards them and recognized that duet of laughter. Older, but still recognizable. I froze. The memories flooded my being as I got chills up and down my spine. It was that laughter I heard in my nightmares. That laughter I woke up to in cold sweats. It was them. I turned around and made my way to the car. I moved out of Miles shortly after that and haven't paid a visit ever since. I just hope that one day that man is caught so I can finally live free of that terror. I sometimes still wonder why the little children were supporting this man's actions. Noah's ring and little finger don't work, and Maddie is married to some guy now. The last time I talked to Noah about this event, he was going through psychological therapy, which left him in a horrible condition and made it impossible to get any sort of information out of him. I wish this whole event was avoided and things were back to normal. But this man ruined my life and is still out there. Thanks for reading this. Creeper with long black hair, let's never meet again.